Hey, I want to talk about VR here for a minute because I said some stuff last year that got back to me now that people just kind of don't understand my point. So I just wanted to go into it for a little bit because I still like VR and I still want VR to be successful. But a bunch of developers are complaining about a drop in revenue. And this is kind of like the last half year. And some of this is the natural play out of what I was talking about. And so, first, is VR dead? No. Is VR dead? Yes. Hang on. So we're seeing actually more people have now experienced VR than ever. And so some of like what I've talked about before is some people just get motion sickness, and the kind of games that are made now are not for those people. Or those, I should say, often the indie devs that I talk with aren't making those kind of games. Meta's off making Alcohol Anonymous simulators in the gym. No one wants to play that. But for like the actiony kind of game things, what we're seeing is a lot of those are moving into places that would make me sick. Now the audience for those are still growing, which then people say, well, Chet, you were wrong. People can get over motion sickness. No. Make made up numbers here. Let's say 10% of the people in the population get sick playing VR. Or don't get sick, don't get sick playing VR. And so they have 100,000 people get a CVR, 10,000 of them can play it. No problems. They can play anything, right? They can play this stuff that just makes everyone else puke. Then you get to 1 million people, and you get 100,000 people. Then you get to 10 million, and you get 1 million people. And that number keeps growing. But the percentage of people isn't changing, right? It's a top of funnel thing, right? So there's a whole bunch of people who are never going to play VR. Be it they don't want to put stuff on their head. They don't want to put stuff on their face. They wear makeup. There's like a whole bunch of things. And now I always hesitate to say that wear makeup because some people are like, oh, well, ladies don't play video games. Oh, shut up. Yes, they do. A large range of people play games, and for large reason, people don't like VR or don't. They may like VR, but they're not able to play it. They're not able to play what the modern games are. They can play Beat Saber. I bet you a lot of headsets are just Beat Saber machines still. But there's a lot of other things happening, right? But so that number does still keep growing, though, right? It does. But the other thing we're also seeing is, and people will be like, oh, well, it's the younger people can take the crazy VR. It's the old people who can't. Yeah. Some of this also what's happening is like even the younger developers, as they're in the headset for a longer period of time, are getting fatigue and eye irritation, headaches, and some things like that. And now we need more studies done there. We also need more studies if it affects different kinds of people and different everything differently. But the problem is all those studies change. So I remember we were back before we'd announced our headset. We had a prototype of a weird headset, but it had head tracking in it. And we were in Boston doing a game jam, and some guy came up to me and he's like, well, I'm from MIT and the military's way worlds ahead of everybody else. I've seen the greatest VR ever, and all Mr. Blah 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 blah, and how I'm an idiot. And I'm like, sure, cool, dude. And then we gave him the demo, and he walked out silently. He just walked out because it was so far ahead of anything that the military had done. The actual full head tracking. And so that was like the big game changer. And that meant that all the other research done before wasn't nearly as good or nearly as insightful. Remember, one thing about getting sick was like, I don't know, the resolution or the screen refresh rate was just insane, like insanely bad. And it was just so bad that it wasn't comparable. And we're going to keep seeing that. We'll probably see a lot of the eye fatigue stuff. That is a solvable problem as we get to, I think, higher resolution, better screens, blah, blah, blah. Like we get better about that, right? But for some people, it still won't go away. But it'll help a lot of people. But some people still won't be able to play it. And, that for me was a weird thing watching Apple's rollout. Because Apple kind of said, hey, people who use VR, we're not for you. We're better than you. And that was really weird and kind of, I felt, insulting. That there's all these other uses. Yeah, you're going to put on a VR headset and cook? You mean we're boiling water with... No, you're not. No, you're not going to do a bunch of timers. Shut up. Right? And it's kind of like these fantasy worlds that we're all going to put our headsets in and live in our world that way, and which is what Mark Zuckerberg wants, right? And we're not. But we are seeing like a stratification of what's working and what doesn't. And that is, we are seeing still the younger crowd playing a bunch of the high action games, and the older crowd, some doing the multiple screen thing, and some other uses are Beat Saber and other kind of more pedestrian games. Those are my kind of games. All right. But also, I realized that the market was no longer for me, and that's why I didn't want to go make VR games. I kind of wanted to make VR games. I would be making something that wouldn't be for where the market was going. And now, as we're going further on, we're seeing that kind of stratification probably happening a little bit more. But what we're also seeing is the problem that I was worried about, and that is we are seeing more developers make less money. Meaning the overall money in the ecosystem may be getting higher with all those players, but we're seeing the introduction of free to play. We're seeing people just more games available. We're seeing Meta put their thumb on the scale for some of the games. That was kind of eye-opening to watch something get pulled from the store and essentially get replaced, right? Because that breaks the whole, hey, free market, this will decide it and everything. And with Meta still putting money in, you're already competing against things that are being funded by Meta, and you have to look as good, but you're with your own thing. And the cool thing is, especially in the VR scene, is that is probably where I find the most gamers who don't give a crap about how the graphics look. So the Meta investment isn't as good. But not to say Meta hasn't made some cool stuff, right? My friends over at Camouflage made some cool stuff. But again, not everybody can play that. Not everybody can experience that. And those people that can are now being split among more developers, and they are also competing against free to play. And so where do you put your time? Because if you are going to put the headset on and you are going to play, what are you playing? What are you putting your time in? Are you just playing Beat Saber? Have you moved on? Right? Like, all of that's the thing competing on, making it a really hard space. But we're getting closer and closer and closer to the real market, right? So you want the real market, meaning you want people getting paid for selling their game, and that being the best-selling games make the most money. Roughly. You know what I'm saying? And because then that means then it's predictable for developers to come into the space and they don't have to kiss up to Meta and get funded for it. And the cool thing is there's a bunch of developers that can live in that space then, right? You can't do a AAA, right, funding of a game, and that's not going to be successful in this space. There's not enough players. But you can do something with a small indie scale and be super successful, right? And that is awesome. And that is awesome to see. And it's awesome to see some things getting updates that were around back when I was still plugging away with people, and seeing them kind of just grind it out and make some really cool stuff. So, but early on, when we were getting like AAA developers involved and all of that, we didn't know. We didn't know what was going to work and what the true market size was. I always try to play it down. I think Oculus was on one side trying to build it up, and Valve was on the other side trying to be like, hey, let's temper expectations. But we still didn't know. And this was just like when I started websites, right? I was early on in the website game, and we didn't know. Could we do a website? I remember talking with the Penny Arcade guys, like, will the website last a week? Is it seasonal? How do we do this? Like, what's the format? What's the expectation? How often do we have to update? What is like all of these things you learn to understand. And we're still kind of doing that with VR, but it feels like we're getting to that shakeout point where a small indie dev team can look and go, hey, if we make something cool and fun, and people will play it and we can make enough money. And that's a good space. But that is not the breakout mainstream hit, and I don't know if VR will ever get to that point. But that's cool if it can live in that space without that. And to that credit, you do have to give Meta some credit for keeping it alive with the headset sales and exposure to a bunch of people that may have not been happening in other places. While there's still cool headsets being made by a bunch of people that I know in the industry, and I wish them the best of luck. It's still a really hard, competitive place. And Meta wishes they weren't making hardware, but they feel the need to. And I get why, but still, because they want to own the platform, and they want to own the store, and they want to blah, 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 right? It's all connected. So there you go. VR is dead, but VR is also dead, and that's pretty cool, because that's a good space to be. So this is a really, really good point, and I think we underestimated this, or at least I underestimated the impact of just having to move would have. I think being in the experience and physically feeling like you're there and actually hitting my head on a wall or something because I'm so into it is a really crazy, great experience. But I'm okay not having that all the time, it seems, because I can have a VR headset sitting on my desk in my office, all set up, ready to go. All I need to do is click and start the game and put on the headset, and I'm good to go. And that's still too much friction. Just the standing up is too much friction, the clearing it out. I mean, I have, sorry, Boris. Should edit that out. He's cleaning himself. And Boris sitting here, I could have to move Boris, right? Like, that is just too much. And even like at Valve, where we had the VR room where all I had to do was walk in and put it on. And it was all set up and I had this giant space cleared for me. It was amazing. I used to have it down in my office, and Man, there's nothing scarier than thinking you're in a room alone and then having your cat brush up against you. And often I would think I'd hear a noise and I would lift up my headset and I would see, well, the door's closed. It's still okay. Bella realized that if she opened the door and then closed it behind her, Boris couldn't come in and she could have the room to herself with me, and then she would go bug me to play. That scared the hell out of me a couple times. It took me a while to figure out what she was doing. But like, yeah, that friction, let alone, yeah, the getting up and moving and everything else, and just the friction of putting the headset on. And especially like, if you got hair looking this good this morning, you don't want to mess that up. You don't want to get big red bumps on your face more than you have. You want to mess up your makeup. Like all of those things just become this friction where I do not think putting something on your face at the end of the day, long term, is going to be something that ever becomes giant and mainstream. Yes, there'll be a whole bunch of uses, and you should not say not to make VR stuff. There's still a great space to make money in and make great content and make great experiences that people love. Because it's, again, when I put that time aside and I say, this is what I'm going to go do, it still delivers an experience that no other platform does. It's just, I guess I don't need that experience all the time. And it's why we play phone games so much, right? Because we're just lazy beasts. It's why we don't eat healthy. It's why we don't exercise. It's why we don't do a whole bunch of stuff. You put the tiniest little bit of friction in front of us, whew, McGill. So this is asking about the exclusives on Meta and the player base. So there's kind of two points here. One of the things that I would push all the time at Valve was the question of, is this for VR or is this for Steam? Because if it's for Steam, I don't care. We'll be fine. If it's for VR, then I'll push for it. And things like, OpenXR and all of that was for VR, not for Steam, right? In a way, it hurts us. And so, but the idea was just always push for that, because at the end of the day, if VR succeeds, if VR is accepted, then we'll be fine and we'll figure it out. Meta had a little bit different of an approach on that. Now, some of that is just because some of them were Meta employees who were Meta employees, and some of them were VR people who pushed for VR as well, right? So there was a mix. And it was often very frustrating. I would have trying to talk with some of these people of like, hey, I'm going to help this developer even though you just signed them for this exclusive. And just let them come on Steam later, but I'll help them now and I'll help your store. I don't care. Like, I'm going to help the developer. That's who I care about. And then there would be, they went from this kind of like, hey, you can put stuff on Steam sometimes, to no, you couldn't. And then it would just be very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. Look at those 5 games. Go back and look at like how Lucky talked about those games of like, oh, this is the new Zelda. This is the new, no. Because this becomes the other problem. The people made games for you. They didn't make games for the market. And I know we hate to talk about like capitalism, market-driven things, but this is a great example of where it works, right? So Meta was out there picking winners. So they were picking the content that they thought you wanted to play versus letting the market decide what people wanted to play and then highlighting it. They eventually got smart about this, right? And some people, it was kind of annoying. I will admit this. Both Google and Meta bought up a lot of people who we found, that I went around and I went to like the stupidest events ever and just talked with people, right? But you saw a lot of people get bought out early in VR, and it's cool because they're good people and I'm glad that happened to them. But it was also frustrating to see like how that progressed out. And Meta was another extension of that, because when they're doing this thing where they're paying people to make the game versus people making things and having to sell it and having to listen to customers and having to listen to what players want, you make something different and you make something better, right? And that was just a different approach. And I get that they were worried about their store, and again, Steam was entrenched, and I think we caught them a little off guard how still entrenched it was, because they're Facebook, oh my God. But yeah, so I kind of get why they did it, but also it was very, very frustrating, and it continues to be the problem where they're paying this high dollar amount to get a game made that will never see the money back. But now everybody competing against them has to have the same kind of investment because their game just doesn't look as good, right? And then that becomes this arms race. The good thing is the Quest 3 can't actually play that high end of looking stuff, so everybody doesn't have to compete that way all the time. But it's still a problem, right? And it's still that you're competing against, it's not a level playing field, and so we're not getting the best stuff, right? If you look at what Steam does, and Steam does really good, is it doesn't pick winners or losers. Instead, it lets the community kind of suss that out, and then it amplifies those winners. Now, that's problematic. It's problematic using it in other places outside of financial markets like this, for sure. Mediocrity, right? That's what that is. It is problematic a ton of times. But in this case, it actually works really well and really lets little devs kind of ride the wave, like Lethal Company. All of a sudden, you're on the front page of Steam and you're getting all this traction, and you're getting it because of that. Where, Quest or Oculus, Meta, Facebook, whatever the hell Zuck's calling it now, will do things like remove things from the store because they have something competing against it that they want to do better. And that is not good.